My name is Julian Thorne, and for most of my 42 years, I lived with a quiet, gnawing terror of the end. I was the kind of man who looked at a sunset and only saw the coming of the dark. To me, life was a singular, fragile candle flame flickering in a vast, howling gale. I believed that when that flame went out, the I that was Julian Thorne, with all my specific memories, my favorite songs, and my unique fears, would simply vanish into a permanent, silent nothingness. I felt like a stranger in this world, a newcomer who had been dropped into a story halfway through, struggling to find my place before the book was slammed shut. I worked as a restorer of antique clocks. I spent my days surrounded by the mechanical ticking of time, obsessed with the precision of seconds and minutes. I thought time was a straight line, a conveyor belt moving us all toward a final cliff. I didn't realize that time is not a line, but a circle, or rather, a vast, swirling ocean where every drop of water has been to the bottom and back to the clouds 1,000,000 times before. The event that shattered my reality happened on a cold October morning. I was working on a massive, floor-to-ceiling grandfather clock in a private estate. I was perched on a high ladder, reaching for a counterweight that had become jammed in the upper housing. My foot slipped on a polished rung. There was a sickening moment of weightlessness, the sound of splintering wood, and then a deafening crack as my head struck the edge of a marble fireplace. In the physical world, my heart stopped for exactly 9 minutes and 42 seconds. To the paramedics who eventually arrived, I was a code blue, a body whose systems had shut down. But inside the silence of my clinical death, those 10 minutes didn't exist. I was suddenly standing in a place where time had no meaning, and the Julian I thought I was began to peel away like old dried paint. The transition was instantaneous. 1 second, I was falling through the air in a panic. The next, I was standing in a void that felt more real than the floor I had just fallen from. It wasn't dark. It was a shimmering, translucent space that felt like it was made of liquid memory. I looked down at my hands, but they weren't the hands of a clock restorer. They were shimmering outlines, translucent and glowing with an ancient golden hue. And then, the download began. It started as a faint whisper, a sense of déjà vu so powerful it made my knees buckle. I looked into the distance of this shimmering void, and I saw a thread. It was a single, glowing line of light that stretched out into infinity. As I focused on it, the thread began to vibrate, and I realized it wasn't just a line, it was a sequence. It was a life thread, and it belonged to me, but it wasn't the life of Julian Thorne. Suddenly, I wasn't just observing the thread, I was in it. I was a young woman in a sun-scorched village in what looked like ancient Mesopotamia. I felt the rough texture of a clay jug in my hands. I felt the heat of the sun on my neck and the deep, aching love I had for a child who wasn't mine in the Julian life. I knew her name. I knew her secrets. I knew the exact way the dust felt between her toes. It lasted for what felt like years, a full lifetime of joys and tragedies, all condensed into a single heartbeat of the NDE. Before I could even process the shock, the thread shifted. I was a soldier on a muddy battlefield in a century I couldn't name. I felt the weight of a heavy iron sword, the taste of copper in my mouth, and the cold, terrifying realization that my life was ending in a ditch. I felt his final breath, my final breath. I felt the grief of the wife I had left behind, a woman I had never met as Julian, yet someone I loved with 1,000-year intensity. Then came another, and another. I was a monk in a mountain monastery, draped in saffron robes, listening to the rhythmic chanting of a language I suddenly understood perfectly. I was a navigator on a wooden ship, staring at stars that looked different than the ones I saw in the 21st century. I was a mother in a Victorian London slum, stitching clothes by candlelight until my eyes burned. I was a thief, a healer, a king, a beggar. The scale of it was suffocating. In those first few minutes of being dead, I didn't just see these lives. I re-inhabited them. The memories flooded in not as stories, but as active files. I remembered the smells of ancient markets, the specific sting of a desert wind, the sound of 100 different languages falling from my own tongue. I realized that the Julian Thorne persona was just the latest costume in a wardrobe that stretched back to the dawn of consciousness. My fear of being a newcomer to the world was revealed to be a massive, cosmic joke. I wasn't a stranger here. I was a veteran. I was an ancient traveler who had walked every corner of this planet, cried 1 billion tears, and laughed under 1,000 different suns. The linear time of the clock shop was a lie. All of these thousands of lives were happening simultaneously in a massive, overlapping tapestry of experience. I could see the connections. How a debt I owed in the 14th century was being repaid through a random act of kindness in 2026. I saw that I had met the same souls over and over again, changing roles like actors in a traveling troupe. My current mother had been my brother. My worst enemy had once been the comrade who saved my life on a battlefield. I stood in the center of this hall of mirrors, trembling with the weight of my own antiquity. I had lived thousands of lives, and yet I was only now beginning to understand the point of the cycle. I was about to find out why we keep coming back, and what happens when the soul finally remembers the path it has walked. In the world of clocks, there is something called a grand complication. It's a timepiece that does more than just tell the hours and minutes. It tracks the phases of the moon, the leap years, and the celestial alignment of the stars. As I stood in that shimmering void, I realized that I had spent my life looking at the tiny, clicking gears of a single hour, while my soul was actually a grand complication encompassing the entire history of human consciousness. The download transitioned from a series of vignettes into a state of simultaneous being. On Earth, we are trapped in the prison of now. We remember the past as a fading photograph and fear the future as an unwritten script. But here, the veil of linear time was shredded. I was no longer Julian Thorne watching a movie of past lives. I was thousands of people all at once. It was an architectural explosion of identity. I felt the collective weight of 10,000 deaths and the electric surge of 10,000 births. I felt the specific hunger of a peasant in a famine-stricken 17th century village, and at the exact same moment, I felt the bloated golden boredom of a courtier in a forgotten dynasty. I was the hunter and the prey. I was the healer who stayed up all night tending to a plague victim, and I was the merchant who turned a blind eye to suffering for the sake of a few extra coins. As a man who obsessed over the seconds of a clock, this was a sensory overload that should have broken my mind. But in this state, my consciousness was expanded. I had the RAM to hold it all. I saw that the reason we forget our past lives when we are born into a new body is a matter of bandwidth. If the human brain had to carry the memories of 10,000 lives, 10,000 loves lost, 10,000 betrayals, 10,000 names, it would simply short-circuit. The forgetfulness is a mercy. It's a clean slate that allows us to focus on the specific lesson of the current chapter. I found myself drawn toward a massive rotating structure in the center of this void. It looked like a cosmic gear, miles high, glowing with a soft bioluminescent blue. It was the master clock of reincarnation. As I hovered before it, I saw that every tooth on the gear was a life, and I saw the pattern. I had always thought my life was random. I thought I was Julian Thorne because of a biological accident. But looking at the gear, I saw the trajectory. I saw that I had been practicing time for centuries. In one life, I was a stonemason, obsessed with the permanence of rock. In another, I was a sailor, obsessed with the shifting tides. In this life, as a clock restorer, I was trying to fix the breakage of time. Every life was a specialized course in a specific frequency of existence. Then the Council of Mirrors appeared. They weren't beings with faces, but rather silhouettes of light that felt like older, more experienced versions of myself. They were the project managers of my soul's journey. They didn't speak, they resonated. Through their resonance, I understood the accounting of the soul. They showed me a life map that looked like a sprawling root system. Every point where two roots touched was a soul contract. I saw a woman I had passed on the street in London, a stranger I had only looked at for 2 seconds. In the map, I saw that she had been my daughter in a life in 12th century France. We had made a contract before we were born to meet on that street corner, just for 2 seconds, so that her frequency could remind me of the softness I had been losing in my Julian life. The sheer complexity of the scheduling was mind-boggling. Millions of souls, all weaving in and out of each other's lives, playing different roles, mother, enemy, lover, stranger, all to trigger specific data points of growth in each other. I saw that there are no NPCs, non-player characters, in this world. Everyone is a protagonist in their own epic, and we are all extras in each other's movies. I saw the theme of my 10,000 lives. Each of us has one. Some souls are exploring power. Some are exploring abundance. My theme was the restoration of the broken. I saw that across thousands of years, I had always been drawn to the things that were falling apart. I had been a diplomat trying to stop a war, a doctor trying to fix a body, and now a man trying to fix a clock. But then, the mirrors began to darken. The council shifted the frequency. They wanted to show me the corruption. They showed me the lives where I had given up, the lives where I had let the brokenness win. I saw myself as a man who had committed a terrible crime of passion in the 1800s. I felt the weight of the guilt, a heavy black sludge in my chest that had taken 3 subsequent lives to cleanse. I saw that karma isn't a punishment from a vengeful God. It's a mathematical balance. If you introduce static into the network, you have to be the one to filter it out in the next iteration. It's just the physics of the spirit. I looked at the gear again, and I saw a glitch. I saw that, in my current life as Julian, I was stuck. I was so afraid of the end of time that I was failing to live in the flow of it. I was trying to stop the clocks instead of letting them run. The Council of Mirrors intensified their light. The void began to pulse with a deep, rhythmic thrum, the heartbeat of the universe. I realized I wasn't just being shown a history lesson. I was being recalibrated. They were aligning the gears of my soul, preparing me for a revelation that would change the way I looked at every human being I would ever meet again. You are not a drop in the ocean, the resonance echoed through my being. You are the entire ocean in a single drop, and it is time to remember the depths. I felt my consciousness being pulled deeper into the gear, toward the primary memory, the very first life I had ever lived on this planet. I was about to find out how the story began. The dive into my primary memory felt like falling through a series of increasingly heavy veils. As I moved backward through the millennia, the complexity of my lives began to shed away. The languages became simpler, the tools more primitive, and the cities dissolved back into the earth. Finally, the noise of civilization vanished entirely, and I landed in the raw, unpolished reality of my very first playthrough on this planet. I was a hunter in a landscape of endless ice and stone. I didn't have a name, not in the way we think of names now. I was a collection of survival instincts, a creature of bone, sinew, and a single flickering spark of self-awareness. I remember the biting cold that felt like a living thing, and the smell of wood smoke and wet fur. But more than that, I remember the moment the spark truly ignited. I was sitting by a fire, looking up at the stars, and for the first time, I felt a question form in my mind. Who is looking? That was the moment the algorithm of Julian began. That was the first line of code in a script that would eventually span 10,000 lives. As I stood in that ancient memory, the Council of Mirrors surged with a blinding, iridescent light. They wanted me to see the why. They wanted me to understand why a soul would choose to endure the agony of birth, the struggle of survival, and the grief of death 10,000 times over. On Earth, we view life as a trial to be survived, or a ladder to be climbed. But from this perspective, I saw that life is a cosmic simulation of completion. Imagine a giant jigsaw puzzle where every piece is a different experience, a different emotion, a different failure, a different triumph. You cannot see the full picture until every piece has been placed. One life as a king gives you the peace of power. One life as a beggar gives you the peace of humility. A life as a mother gives you sacrifice. And a life as a soldier gives you courage. I saw that the I called Julian Thorne was actually a nearly completed puzzle. I was in the final stages of a massive, multi-eon data-gathering mission. Every life I had lived was a specific variable test. What happens if a soul is given everything? What happens if it is stripped of everything? How does it respond to betrayal? How does it handle absolute love? Then, the council showed me the most disruptive truth of all, the role of the antagonist. They brought forward a soul I recognized instantly. In my Julian life, this was a man who had defrauded me, a man who had nearly ruined my business and caused me years of legal and emotional hell. I had hated him with a bitterness that felt like poison in my veins. But here, in the shimmering void, he wasn't my enemy. He was my oldest friend. I saw our soul contract. Before we were born into our current lives, we had sat together in this very space. I saw us laughing, embracing, and agreeing on the script. He had volunteered to play the villain in my life because he loved me enough to provide the friction I needed to grow. He had agreed to take on the karma of being the deceiver so that I could learn the lesson of forgiveness. The bad people in our lives aren't accidents. They are advanced soul actors who take on the hardest roles to help us level up. When I realized this, the hatred I had carried for years simply evaporated. It was replaced by a staggering sense of gratitude. I saw that we are all part of a divine troupe, and the drama of Earth is just the stage where we refine our light. The council then expanded my vision to include the Library of Souls. I saw millions of life threads crisscrossing the globe. I saw that there is no such thing as a new soul. Everyone you pass on the street, the barista, the bus driver, the person you argue with on the internet, is an ancient, multi-dimensional traveler. We are all veterans of 1,000 wars and survivors of 1,000 disasters. When you look at a stranger's eyes, you aren't looking at a person. You are looking at an epic that has been in production for millions of years. I saw the accumulated wisdom of the planet. I saw that every time a human being learns a lesson, every time someone chooses love over fear or truth over convenience, it updates the entire human grid. We are a networked consciousness. My 10,000 lives weren't just for me. They were a data upload for the collective. Each of us is a probe sent out by the source to map a specific corner of human experience. Suddenly, the master clock began to chime. It wasn't a sound, but a vibration that rattled my very essence. The council of mirrors began to fade, their light pulling back into the center of the void. They were preparing for the final revelation, the goal of the cycle. I felt a question burning in my mind. If I have lived 10,000 lives and I have learned all these lessons, what happens when the puzzle is finally finished? What is the exit strategy? The council responded with a vision of a sun that wasn't a star, but a gateway of pure awareness. They showed me that the end of the cycle isn't nothingness. It is the integration. It is when the drop finally realizes it was never separate from the ocean. But then a shadow fell over the vision. I felt a system interrupt. The paramedics in the physical world had successfully shocked my heart. The Julian hardware was trying to force boot the system. I saw my physical body on the marble floor of the estate, surrounded by frantic people in blue uniforms. The connection was being re-established, and the download was being cut short. I felt a frantic need to stay. I hadn't seen the end yet. I hadn't finished the final update. The council sent one last powerful resonance. You don't need to finish it here, Julian. You are going back to live the finish. The clock is not stopping. It is being reset. I was about to be slammed back into a 42-year-old body, carrying the weight of 10,000 years. I was about to go from being a cosmic giant to being a clock restorer again, but I knew that I would never be able to look at a clock or a person the same way again. I was about to learn the 3 laws of the eternal traveler, the secrets that allow a soul to cheat the forgetfulness and live with a foot in both worlds. The pull of the physical world felt like a massive magnet dragging a piece of iron through thick, cold mud. My infinite perception began to narrow, the edges of the shimmering void blurring as the hardware of Julian Thorne demanded my return. But before the final sync occurred, the Council of Mirrors imparted the 3 laws that would allow me to maintain my spiritual connection in a world designed to make me forget. They called these the 3 laws of the eternal traveler. The first is the law of vibrational resonance. I was shown that we don't just stumble into our lives, we are drawn to them. Every thought and action from my previous 10,000 lives had created a specific frequency. My current life as a clock restorer wasn't a random choice. It was the exact frequency I needed to resolve a static I had carried for centuries. The secret I had to bring back was that we are the architects of our own luck. If you want to change your future lives, you must change your current frequency. By choosing kindness now, you are literally pre-programming a smoother journey for the soul you will be in 100 years. The second is the law of the unified thread. The council showed me that there is no them, there is only us in different stages of the play. Every person I meet is a version of myself in a different costume. The man who cheated me, the woman who loved me, the stranger who ignored me. They are all mirrors, showing me different facets of my own ancient history. The law is simple. Whatever you do to another, you are doing to a past or future version of yourself. When you understand this, morality ceases to be a set of rules and becomes a logical necessity. You don't help others because it's good. You help them because they are you. The third is the law of the master cog. As a clock restorer, I was obsessed with the past and the future, how to fix what was broken and how to keep it running. But the council showed me that the source only exists in the absolute now. All 10,000 of my lives were happening simultaneously in a great, eternal present. The master cog of the universe is the current moment. When we worry about the future or regret the past, we desync from the source. The secret to cheating the forgetfulness is to live so fully in the present that the static of time cannot cloud your vision. As the third law was seared into my consciousness, the master clock of the void gave one final deafening chime. The iridescent light of the council exploded into a blinding white gold, and I felt the squeeze. It was an agonizing compression. My soul, which had just been as wide as the galaxy, was being forced back into a 5-foot 10-inch frame. I felt my lungs burn with the first sharp intake of air, an air that felt thin and metallic compared to the liquid peace of the void. I felt the cold marble of the fireplace against my skin. I heard the frantic, distorted voices of the paramedics. "We've got a pulse! He's coming back!" I opened my eyes, and the world looked like a low-resolution, flickering shadow. I saw the faces of the paramedics, and for a split second, I didn't see medical professionals. I saw ancient souls I had known in a dozen different centuries. One of them, a young man with a focused, intense gaze, had been my brother in a life in the 1500s. I wanted to reach out and call him by a name he wouldn't recognize. I wanted to tell them all that they were giants trapped in tiny rooms. But the Julian script was overwriting my memory. The forgetfulness was moving in like a thick fog. I fought to hold on to the data, to keep the thousands of lives from slipping away into the subconscious. The recovery was long and difficult. My body was broken, but my mind was recalibrated. I spent weeks in the hospital, and every time someone walked into the room, I felt the echo of our shared history. I couldn't look at a clock without seeing the great gear of reincarnation. I realized that my obsession with fixing time was actually a deep-seated urge to heal the soul's journey. I am back in my shop now. The ticking of the clocks no longer sounds like a countdown to the end. It sounds like a metronome for the eternal dance. I still restore antique timepieces, but I do it with a different intent. I'm not just fixing gears, I'm honoring the process. I treat every customer like a returning king or a long-lost comrade, because I know that, in the grand complexity of the thread, they probably are. The man who defrauded me. I called him. I didn't ask for the money back. I just told him I understood. I saw the role he played for me, and I released the karma. The static in my life cleared instantly. I want you to understand something very important. Your life is not a single, isolated event. You are not a disposable product of biology. You are a masterpiece of persistence. You have survived every disaster, every war, and every heartbreak for thousands of years just to be here, in this moment, reading these words. You feel like you don't belong here sometimes because you remember, deep in your marrow, a place where there are no clocks. You feel a sense of déjà vu because you have been here before. You recognize certain people because you've loved them in 1,000 different costumes. Don't be afraid of the end. There is no delete command in the universe. There is only save and restart. You are here to gather data, to learn how to love under the most difficult variables. When you look in the mirror tomorrow, don't just see the face of the person you are today. Look deeper. Look for the glint of the ancient hunter, the wisdom of the monk, and the strength of the soldier. You are a grand complication, a magnificent multi-eon work of art in progress. The clock is ticking, yes, but it's not counting down to zero. It's counting the experiences you are adding to the source. Live your life like you've lived 10,000 before and like you'll live 10,000 more. Because the truth is, you already have. I am Julian Thorne, a restorer of clocks and a witness to the eternal thread. And I can tell you for a fact, you've been here before, and the best parts of the story are yet to be written.